Hello and welcome to Drawing Challenge number 1. So if you've got our Drawing Challenge booklet, this is the first one in the series. If not, just join in with them as and when you want to. I'm going to be showing you how to draw an eye. So I'm going to be working from this image of an eye. So it's a nice clear shape. I can see plenty of detail and I can add in a little bit of tone and shadow as well. So if you've not done much drawing before, it's just really practice. It's always practice about getting proportions and sizes. The more you draw, the better you'll get. So never give up, just start again. And the more you do it, the easier you will find it. You will probably want a ruler for this. So I'm just going to get my ruler ready. That's going to help you to get your proportions. And you may want, if you don't have a ruler, you could just use something with a straight edge. So here's my ruler here. So when you're drawing something out, I like to plot out where things are going to be. So if I look at my eye shape, I'm going to work out roughly how far across on the paper the inner corner of the eye is going to be. So it's going to be about there. And then my outer corner is about here. So I'm going to, if you want to measure, you can do, but you don't have to be that accurate. I'm just going to put in some little marks, and you need to do these fairly light because you're going to rub them out later. I've done them a bit darker so that you can see them. So this is going to show me where the inner edge and the outer edge of my eye is going to fall. And then we need to work out where the top and the bottom is going to be. So again, if you've got something straight, you could go straight across here, look, and do a little mark there. And then you could go straight across here and do a mark there. So actually the opening to the eye isn't actually that big. It's going to be a reasonably small size compared to the paper. And then obviously we've got the detail around it as well. So this is going to have my eye shape within it there. And then what you need to do is then sketch in the shape. So look at the shape of the eye. It goes round into a smooth arc. And actually the outside corner of the eye is slightly higher. Look, if I put my finger and the pencil there, it's slightly higher than the inside corner. So that needs to come up and that needs to, sorry, that needs to go up and that needs to go down a bit. So my eye shape's going to fit into there. So I'm going to just really lightly sketch that in. I'm going to just sketch that shape in there. So if you're looking at a different picture, look really carefully at the shape of the eye to work out what shape it is and where the corner is. And then I've got a slightly shallower curve here that goes up. So this is more of a shallow curve like that. So if your little points are in the way now, you can move them or rub them out. So this is my shape of my eye. And then we need to look at the iris shape. So the iris can be different sizes on different people, and it's also in different places depending on which way they're looking. So on this eye, usually when someone's looking forward, you can see more of the bottom than you can of the top. But actually, you can't usually see the very bottom of the iris there. It usually just falls into the bottom of the eyelid. And space-wise, it fills up a lot of the eye, but not much. It's actually in the middle there. And then it cuts in from the top of the eyelid on this picture and it smooths round and it just skims into the bottom there, look. So it just skims into the bottom like that. There we go. So there's my iris shape there. And then the pupil, again, it will be different sizes depending on how much light there is. So if there's a lot of light, the pupil goes quite small because it doesn't need to let too much in. But if there's not very much light, the pupil's a lot bigger. So the pupil on this one, it's not bang in the centre. It's slightly nearer the top of the eyelid than the bottom. So if I just draw that in there, look, you can just see where that is. So that's got my pupil shape in. And then nearly all eyes, when they're photographed or looked at, because they're so shiny and smooth, you will see a reflection of light on the eye. So in this one, you can see a reflection of the window. It might just be a small little patch. It doesn't have to be a window shape. It's going to depend on where the light's coming from as to where it is. But on this eye, it's here. So I'm just going to outline where that is so that I don't forget it's there. I've got a little bit at the top there. So this is the main shape. And then I'm going to look at the shape of the iris. So inside the iris, you can just see some outlining around it there. And that's where the tone changes. So it's little bits of changes of tone in the iris. So you're going to have to look at the shape, the picture of yours and see where those tones are. So I'm just going to draw around where the tone sort of changes. So I've got like a little reminder. Okay, I'm going to go around there. All right. So I'm drawing in then just some area where I'm going to add tone and shade. And then the outside of the iris is often a little bit darker than the middle. So if you look at this one here, it's a little bit darker around this edge. So I'm going to use a shading pencil. If you've got a 2B pencil, that's good for shading. So this is just an HB pencil for sketching. 2B pencil is good for shading. You can use this though, but this will give you a bit of an easier ride when you're doing your shading. So you just need to smooth around. And then I'm going to gradually press lighter, just building in some lighter tones there. And we've got lots of other pattern going on in this eye, but I'll do a simpler version of it so that you can just get a bit more practice in how to go from light to dark. So I'm just gradually going lighter there. So just practicing from light to dark. And if you want to do all these other shapes in there, you can look really carefully and just draw them in where you can see the tones changing. That's just going to give you some light and dark shadows. So just pressing a bit lighter there. And sometimes it's easier to turn the paper rather than turn your hands. If you need to turn your paper round, what you must remember is that these bits here are light, so you don't colour those in. You're going to, or shade those in, I should say. You're going to leave those white. So you go up to the edge of that and hopefully draw them in nice and light so that you can't see too much of an edge around them. If you haven't, just fade them back with your rubber a little bit, just so that you can only just see them. There are some other small light areas as well, but we're just going to focus on doing the bigger light reflections that you can see. That's it. So I'm just going round, look, shading. So pressing a bit harder and then gradually lighter. If you want to practice shading, do a tonal scale on the back. So press down hard, then practice going across and gradually getting lighter and pressing lighter. And the idea is you keep pressing lighter until you're pressing so light you cannot really see it. And that's a tonal scale. So you can practice doing some of those on the back. If you find you're going too hard and it's going a little bit dark, go back to using your HB pencil, because it does take a bit of practice using a 2B because they are a lot darker. So then you can just build in, and then you can just, if you wanted to, just sort of shade in some of those lines, because on this photo you can see sort of textured lines moving out from the iris, so kind of going, radiating out from the center. So I'm just going to shade some of those in. And then nearer the top, look, we've got a lot of shadow under that lid there. So I'm just going to just shade that in a little bit there. Now we're going to come back to the shading on the eye. We're just going to get the basis in. And then the centre, obviously we've got this pupil, which is very dark. So you'd need to shade that in quite dark. So we'll do that bit now. I'm going to just shade in the eye, quite dark. There we go. Okay. And then a little bit of shading just from the pupil radiating out. So I'm doing lots of in and out lines, look, all the way around, out from the pupil, just meeting up with those other lines that I did earlier. Can you see that there, look, just radiating out. Often when people draw eyes, when they're just beginning, they tend to leave the iris uncoloured. And actually, most people have colour in the iris of their eye. That's this bit here. There is often a temptation that people leave it light, but it very rarely is just colourless. Usually there's a colour there. So obviously don't forget about those shadows that you did. If you accidentally go over them, then you can just use your rubber. Just shade back where they are. Or shade around where the edge of them is, like that, look. So now I'm just using the tip of the pencil really soft, just to go around the real mid-tone. So these are the bits that aren't white, they're much lighter. That's just going to blend that in there. it. So I've done a really nice iris shape to start, and again, use your rubber look to just pick out those highlights if you need to, where the light shines on the eye. Just build them back in. And obviously it's darker on this side because the light's coming from the other side. Okay, so we've done a bit of work on the iris there, so we need to look at the shape of the eye. So obviously we've got this inner eyelid here. So we can just roll that line in if it's faded back a little bit. And then above the eye, we've got the eyelid. So that starts from just above the corner here, and it goes up and over, and it just widens slightly as it goes to the outer of the eye, and it stops about here. So that's this sort of inner eyelid there. And then when we were doing eyelashes, the one thing people always tend to do with eyes is draw them from the inner eyelid. So this is your inner eyelid here, where the eyelid meets the eyeball. But your eyelashes don't start from that line. If you look, there's a gap. This is the outside edge of the inner eyelid there, look. So it's not a solid line, but if there was one in there, that's where it would be. And that's the line from which the eyelashes start. So I'm going to fade that back because you don't really see a line there. But I want to keep that there in my head so that I know where to start the eyelashes from. So before we do the eyelashes though, and the same actually with the above, if you look very carefully, the eyelashes don't start from that line there. There's a very, very thin or invisible line just above it, and that's the point from where the eyelashes will start. So again, fade that back so you can only just see it. The eyebrow then, they're going to be different for everybody. So on this picture, there's a space here, and it's about the height from the inner corner of the eyelid up as it is from the inner corner of the eyelid to the eye here to the pupil. So that distance there is about the same here. So you could use even just a pencil or something, look, to mark where it will be. So it's about that same distance there to there. And then it starts, and it actually goes a bit lower across the eye here, and then it goes wider again, and it goes out past, well past the edge of the eye. So if you were going to draw an outline around where the eyebrow would be, it would be about there. But we don't have an outline on this eye. So again, fade that back so that you can't really see it. And then look at the direction that the eyebrow grows. So they usually grow straight up, or, well, more vertical here. And then I'm using kind of quite flicking pencil lines like this, look. And then they start to go across, and then they really go more of a horizontal direction, not perfectly horizontal though, they're still slightly pointing up towards the corner of the page, and then they go out and across. So I'm going to do this lightly at first, and then I can have more detail later. So that's where my eyebrow is going to be. What we need to do though is build up a bit of tone before we put any more detail on. So in this line that we've done for the eyelid, again, it's not really a line, it's shading. So I'm fading it back, and then from that eyelid sort of down, I'm going to shade. So I'm going to shade like this and then gradually press lighter, look, heavier, lighter. And you're going to just build a little bit of shadow there for the eyelid. Heavier, lighter. You can use your finger to smudge. It's quite nice for skin tones. Don't overdo it though, or you can flatten all your lovely tones. So it's good for areas where you want lots of shading and smooth tone. But what you don't want to do is smudge all of this here and then find that it looks a bit flat. So I'm holding my pencil right at the tip now, right on its side, so on an angle, almost flat to the paper. And I'm just building in some I'm gradually pressing lighter, look, so I'm keeping this band of light down the middle here because it's quite light there. Now it is a lot darker in this corner because the light's coming from this way. So the light's hitting this and this, but this bit in there is in shadows because it's more in the corner. So I'm going to just shade a little bit darker there. And then it just sort of fades out as it gets near the top of the eye. Above the eye, there's a little bit of tone, but it's actually fairly even. It's a bit lighter up there. So I'm going to hold the pencil on its side and just really lightly build in a bit of shade in there and fade it out. And again, this is quite nice where you use your finger just to smudge it in a little bit like that. Okay. And then underneath the eyelid, you've got a little tiny bit of shadow where the eyelid meets the eyeball. So I'm just going to shade that in and just again fade it in to the eyeball really lightly because it's ever so white and shiny, that eyeballs. We don't want to make it too dark. And then look, just in the corner there, a little bit of, it's actually more of a pink, but we'll do it as we're doing it with pencil. We'll just do it as a light tone with the pencil there. I'm just going to round that off a little bit there, look. You see that? And that's just going to add a little bit of shape to the eyeball there. And then on the inner corner, it's a lot darker than that. And don't forget, we've got this bit here right in the corner. So the eyeball doesn't go to a point. You've got this soft flesh section there. And then it's kind of almost like a triangle, a soft triangle shape. So I'm going to draw that in there. And then all of this is actually quite shadowy there. So I'm going to go a little bit darker, not as dark as the pupil, because I don't want to kind of overpower it. I'm going to go a little bit darker. Try not to lean on your picture as you're drawing. So sometimes people put like a scrap of paper over it as they're drawing, if you find that easier. I'm just going to just sort of hold my hand back a bit, and I'm just going to shade quite a heavy mid-tone, and then I'm gradually going to press lighter, because it does go quite light before it gets to the iris there. It is much darker than the outside edge there. There we go. I've got some nice shadow there, and again you can blend that up to the white using a finger. Don't overdo it. And then we've got a little bit of shadow, look, just as the inner eyelid meets the eyes. I'm just going to put a little bit of a line in there. Okay. In this bit here, it's kind of a mixture tone. So I'm just going to do a bit of a mid-tone shadow just around the edge of that sort of triangle shape that we've created, just to make it stand out a little bit there. And then we need to think about the eyelashes. So again, before we do them, we'll do a little bit of tone actually underneath the eye, because once you put the eyelashes on, you don't want to shade over the top of them. Very much in the corner now, you can't really see them. You'll have very, very faint lines there. They're ever so faint though, on this person. Don't do them too heavy, otherwise it can be hard to kind of go back from that. So I'm just going to do some really faint lines there. They're kind of like smile lines. We all get them at the corner of our eye there. And then we've got a few really faint lines underneath. But again, I'm not going to put too much detail on those because I'm going to use mostly shading. There's a lot of actual texture going on in this skin, but we're going to simplify it into just shadows. So I'm holding the pencil again quite high. And what I'm going to do is just build in some mid-tone here. And just fade it out. So there's more shadow under the corner of the eye usually than this side. And that's because you've got often shadow coming in from the nose that's here, creating, and even if the light's coming that way, you've got shadow from the sort of the bone above the eye. So there's usually shadow under the eye a little bit. And sometimes we've naturally got shadows there in our skin tone anyway. So again, you can use your finger to smudge that in if you want to. So that's going to give us some natural tone here. And then you could even just sort of blend that in at the top there. It doesn't meet in a point round like that though. There's usually a gap of light about here. And if you need to work on your tones a little bit above the eye, you could do that now as well. So just look at where if it goes a little bit darker, you could blend that in. And now the eyelashes. So without the eyelashes, it looks a little bit unusual. So we need to add those in. So I'm going to look at the shape of how they grow. They don't grow straight up. Even if they are quite vertical or pointing up, they will scoot down and sort of out and then up. So as we're looking at that, we'll start with the middle ones first. They look shorter than they are because of what's called foreshortening, which is where you're looking at things from straight in front of you. So actually, they sort of curve down and up, but you can't see that bit. So we'll just do them with flicking motions. Now these eyelashes have got mascara on by the looks of it, so they form in sort of little segments, but they definitely all stop with more of a finer point. So rather than drawing a line and stopping, try and flick up with your pencil a little bit. And then as they go out this way, they start to scoop out to the side a bit. They don't come up too much higher than the top of this eye, this crease here, this fold. So don't go really high with them. No one's eyelashes usually meet their eyebrows. And then as you go across here, look, they start to scoop out a little bit more again. So they're bowing. Can you see they're bowing down? And I'm actually starting them. Look, do you remember that imaginary line here? I'm starting them from just above that where the eyeball you can see here. I'm starting from just above and going across. And that's because, remember, we said the eyelashes don't grow from right next to the eyeball. That's the common mistake that people often make when they're drawing eyes. So then they go out, and they do go a little bit longer towards the edges. So they sort of starting from this imaginary line, going out across and scooping out like that, look. So that's actually where they're starting from here. And then on this side, look, starting from that imaginary line, going across. And then they thin out a lot as you get to the inner. You don't have many eyelashes right in here. You might get a few little wispy ones like that, look, but you don't get many there. Okay, so we've got some at the top. So you could spend a bit longer going through those and really picking out each individual eyelash if you wanted to. From the bottom, this is where it's more noticeable that it doesn't start from that line. Don't draw them from there. Look at that gap. If you need to, draw in a really faint line there. And then again, they're a little bit thinner in this very corner, but then they get a little bit longer. And then this time they sort of go out and down. Now, bottom eyelashes usually aren't as long as top ones, but they may look longer because you're seeing them from looking down at them slightly. So going across, and they don't grow perfectly parallel to each other either. They can sort of cross over each other. So I'm just sort of looking at a section and then working out roughly how far. If it helps you, you could do a little mark as to so you know how far you're going to go down to when you're doing these little flicks. So can you see here? Look, they go slightly up and then down, slightly up and then down. That's just the way that the hair grows. And then as it gets past this center line here, they start to curve that way then. Okay, so this is where they sort of start to swap over. And then they thin out as you get nearer and start to go a little bit more pointing this way. And then look, they stop about there. So they're quite dark on this photo. So I'm just going to go over those a little bit. There we are. And at this point, you may need to look again at your shadows. So at the moment, it's a little bit more shadow than I've got on there. So I'm just going to build that shadow in a bit now. So I'm just going to work in with my pencil over where it's a little bit darker. Remembering not to touch those white bits. And again, a rubber's great. If your rubber's not very sharp, you could always trim it with a pair of scissors. Maybe if you're a child doing this, ask someone to help you with that bit. But a nice sort of pointed edge to your rubber. And there is a little bit of shading on the white of the eye, just an ever such a small amount. So if you wanted to just shade in a bit, because it's kind of like a rugby ball shape, the light's shining on it and it's going to hit this sort of band in the middle first. So if you are going to do any shading on the white of the eye, it's probably going to be at the top, at the bottom, and then at the top, but probably not so much in the middle there. So I'm just going to smudge that down and then up with my finger. Can you see that there? And I'm going to keep this sort of band in the middle quite light. Okay, so you might want to spend a bit of time just checking your eyelashes. If you've got a pencil sharpener, do use your sharpener to keep sharpening your pencil, especially when you're doing eyelashes, because you'll want a fairly precise tip. Look at the difference that makes when I've sharpened that. And 2B pencils are so soft, you have to sharpen them much more often than you do an HB pencil. It's worth investing in a decent sharpener as well. If you try and use a cheap sharpener, or not necessarily cheap, but one that just isn't very good, then it can just keep snapping your lead every time you sharpen it, which can be a real pain. So then eyebrows, then they need to have a bit more depth to them to match. So I'm going to use that same flicking motion. Look how it softens the edges then as I'm doing it. You might not want to do an eyebrow on yours. You might just be focusing on the eye. Sometimes I think an eye looks a little bit lost without an eyebrow there, but if you're just focusing on the eye, you might not need to do this bit. And you could just build in some tone. And then it's up to you how much else you want to do around it. You could spend a little bit longer looking at some of these other shadows. But that's basically a quick tutorial on how to draw an eye. And you could practice doing eyes looking from different angles. So you could have an eye that's looking up. You'll see a lot more white underneath. You could try eyes with expressions as well. So somebody who's smiling or really laughing will have a much different shape to their eye than somebody who's looking shocked or surprised. So you could practice drawing different shaped eyes as well if you wanted to. If you want images to use, there are plenty of websites where you can get free images that you're allowed to download and use to get you started into practice. Okay, so thank you for joining me for eye, and I look forward to showing you the next challenge.